Try not to give you too many questions. Today, I first want to ask you, where are you from? Did you have a lot of extended family back down south, or the military? How did you get into it, and where did you end up going? Where were you stationed throughout your term? Let me ask you this. There's two things that come to mind. So, this is your first time seeing a color sign.
And at that point, I kind of realized what was going on. So I peered around the corner, and there's another window, and up at the top of it, they got colored written across it. And so I turned back to the window, and I pounded my fist on the thing. I said, "Give it to me here."
Yeah.
And she says, "Excuse me," and she left. She called the sheriff.
Wow. But I tried to also get a good flow of things. So,
all right.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. My name is Jailon Henry, and today I am with the Whitney Griswold, Professor of Economics, African American Studies, and Urban Studies at Yale University, Professor Gerald Jaynes.
Hello.
Thank you again for being with me today and giving me the honor to interview you to try to capture your story in a different way. Today, I first want to ask you, where are you from?
I'm from a small town in the northern part of Illinois, Streeter, Illinois.
All right. And what was it like growing up there?
Well, I grew up really like in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
And it was a nice place to grow up until you got to your teens, because it's a small town.
Okay.
So, there's not that many things to do. Once you hit like 14, 15,
yeah, I can see that.
It's not the greatest place to be, but it's still nice. They had a lot of really great people in it, and good public schools and things like that, and a lot of different role models, both black and white.
Okay. So you mentioned you had a lot of great role models, black and white. What was the demographic of this town like?
Demographic was kind of funny for a black person.
Okay.
Really. I would say that black people represented not even 1% of the population.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, almost everybody in the town who was black, I would say like half of them were my mother's family.
Okay.
And cousins and things. And then the other half were, for the most part, people who had just migrated in during the 50s and late 40s.
Gotcha. From
Mississippi and Tennessee for the most part.
Okay, so would you say that your family being there was a product of the Great Migration?
Not really.
Okay.
My mother's mother was actually born in Illinois in 1887.
Okay. Whoa.
Just north of Peoria.
Okay.
Illinois. Her father had come from the South. He was from Pensacola, Florida.
Really?
Yeah. But he came up right before the Great Migration began too.
Okay. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida, and that's why I'm maybe 2 hours away from Pensacola.
From Pensacola?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, gotcha. And so, did you have so you said her family, her father came from Pensacola, so did you have a lot of extended family back down south, or was it?
We had none.
Really?
Yeah, we didn't have any. My mother was born in the same town I was.
Mm-hmm.
My father was born about 70 miles from there, all the way back in 1915.
Hmm.
So his parents had come before the Great Migration as well.
Okay. Okay, cool.
His parents were married in Jackson, Michigan.
Jackson, Michigan.
In 1906, I think.
Okay. Okay. What did your parents do?
My mother was a homemaker, and my father was a brick mason.
Really? Okay. And did he get to work with someone? Was he working with I guess if he was only 1% white black town, was he working with poor white people, working with white people? How did that work?
Yeah, he's pretty much working. There was nothing that went on that we didn't do. Everything involved white people.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so his employers would all be white. His co-workers would be white.
Did you feel, and I'll get into this a little later on, but did he face, from what you could experience, discrimination because he wasn't white?
Yes, because it's the Jim Crow period.
Yeah.
So he faced a lot more discrimination than I ever did. But he was from a really small town also, way smaller than the one where I grew up, where they just had a few black families as well. And now that you asked that, I always wondered how much discrimination my father had faced when he was a young boy, because his family is very light skinned, so they're all like, if you see them a quarter of a block away, you don't know whether they're white or not. But most black people, once they get to you, you know they're black.
Yeah.
Right. So I always wondered, he might have melded right in with all the other children in his classes pretty well. But then when I got a little older, he started telling me some stories, so I knew that wasn't really the case. Okay. So yeah, he faced some discriminations.
Do you remember any of the stories that he told you about when he was growing up or when he was working?
Well, I remember one, a special one. My father was one of the premier high school sprinters in Illinois in the 1930s. Actually, so was my mother's brother, so that was an interesting thing there. But anyway, my father told me that his the last two years of high school, when he would go down to run in the state championships, which were in Champaign-Urbana, where the University of Illinois is, right? That they would go there, but he was not allowed to stay in the hotel.
Really? Okay.
Right, so this would be like the 1930s.
Got you. Okay.
And because he couldn't stay in the hotel, it would be like him and maybe one other black person. The coach would go to the black neighborhood, and they would find a family who would let them stay in their house.
Wow.
So my father said, he's in there the night before the race. He's in a house with some strangers. He doesn't sleep, doesn't get good rest, so he never performed.
Wow.
So that was a little bit of what's going on in what you would call Central Illinois in the 1930s. Yeah. Because Champaign-Urbana was a very segregated and kind of racist city.
You said this was in the 1930s when your dad was growing up. I'm thinking a little, just to try to tie in the rest of the history with it. This is, I guess not necessarily post Reconstruction, because this is the North, but this is post Civil War and pre Jim Crow. Do you know if there were any of the same type of experiences like black people faced in the South when it came to like the KKK or like basically mob violence or mass displacement?
In the areas where my parents were? Okay, not really in the areas where they were, but keep in mind, my grandparents especially, all four of my grandparents were born in the 1880s.
Wow. Okay.
So they entered so they're like in their 30s and 20s when we have things like the Chicago race riot. Yeah. The Springfield race riot in Springfield, Illinois, the capital of Illinois. These were, right? So, and then of course the Tulsa race riot. Yeah. So these are things that certainly made a huge impression upon them. And it kind of swayed how they thought. They were always aware of being black Americans, and that although they had a lot of interactions with white people simply because of where they lived and had a lot of white friends, they still knew enough they had to be wary of any strange white person that might come into your thing. So I always remember the way, what would be different. So I was born in the late 1940s, and I'm born in that town, and at that time, probably 2/3 of black people who were born around the time I was would have been born in the South, deep under Jim Crow, because it's the 1940s, right? And so they learned how to behave with race relations, whether it would be Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, Florida, whatever it might be. They learned what you had to do to accommodate race relations. And I was kind of taught the opposite.
Yeah. I would imagine. Okay, yeah.
I'll never forget my grandmother. My grandmother said to me when I was probably like 8 or 9 years old, I don't know why the subject came up, but she said, if any white person ever disrespects you and looks like they are going to harm you, and the exact word she said was, take a stick and beat the mud out of them.
Oh, God.
So I was taught.
It was a different time, though, where things could have really happened to you if somebody came and tried to, I understand.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were taught to fight.
Yeah.
And that you would never accept any kind of Jim Crow behavior towards you.
Yeah.
So we didn't know anything about separate water fountains or segregated schools. They didn't have enough black people in my town to have a segregated school.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I never had a black teacher in my entire life, not even when I got to college.
Let me ask you this. So you mentioned the Springfield race, right? I was actually listening to a podcast on the way up. It's called Seizing Freedom, and it was talking about just basically talking about that riot and basically how like around 2,000 black people left the city of Springfield. Did you experience growth in your town, or did you experience that change in demographics as a result, or do you think those people all just went to Chicago?
Good. That would be a good question. I think those people probably just scattered around in the smaller towns. I kind of doubt they all went to Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of times, that's one of the amazing differences between being in the South and being in the North.
Yeah.
So I already described where I grew up. And that pretty much, you go to any northern town, you will find a few black people.
Yeah.
Okay? And so the first time I went south, I was completely amazed when I went in the small town. I mean, I knew there's going to be lots of black people in the South, right? And if you go to like Birmingham, or Columbus, Georgia, or Jackson, Mississippi, or whatever, I expected to see lots of black people.
Yeah.
What I didn't expect to see was if you went to some little tiny town, and half the people or more were still black. It was just totally mind blowing to me.
Let me. I like the way you're going with that. I want to ask you about how your career started. First with the military. How did you get into it, and where did you end up going? Where were you stationed throughout your term?
All right. Well, how I got into the military is kind of an interesting story in and of itself. So I was like 18 years old, 6 months out of high school.
Okay. Whoa.
Now I was working in a fertilizer factory. And I woke up one morning and I had a kind of identity crisis of self-being. Because I said to myself, why am I working in this fertilizer factory? It wasn't so much, looking down on people who work in factories or anything like that. But I knew that I was a person with a lot of different talents. And I was like, I'm wasting my talents.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get out of bed. And a deep depression sunk in to me. Yeah. And I said, I have to do something to change this. Yeah. And the next day I joined the Army.
Wow. That's a strong feeling to make you quickly change like that. Yeah. Wow. Okay. And so when you joined I guess it's a lot different than what it is now. I mean, I know now a lot of times they promise, people, you'll get plenty of money, you get certain things that they promise you anything. What kind of life did you see yourself gaining once you went to the Army?
I was just trying to get out of Dodge. This is the basic idea. Maybe that expression's old.
No, I'm familiar. Yeah.
Right. So, so I knew what the Vietnam War was already going on, but I didn't even care.
Yeah. Wow.
I didn't care. No. I was like, if I stay in this town,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna have this sort of like ordinary life, which is fine for a lot of different people. But I had always had aspirations and dreams, and I knew that I had to do something to make it happen. This is the 1966, and there weren't all the kind of scholarships they have now. I was an athlete in high school, but I wasn't, and I played on all the teams, and I played, but I wasn't good enough to get scholarships to go to any kind of decent college
Understood.
or anything like that. And my parents didn't have money to send me to college. So that's why I was working in that fertilizer factory. The idea was I was going to be saving up money, but the saving was going kind of slow, even though I wasn't paying rent or anything like that. But, so I just decided the Army was going to do it, and I'd rather, I was 18. You don't think, even as Vietnam, I wasn't thinking I might die. But even if I had thought about that, I think I would have said, so what?
Wow.
That's better than spending the next 50, 60 years never finding out what I might be able to accomplish in my life.
Yeah. Right. Wow. Okay. So.
And I also knew there probably was going to be a new GI Bill.
So you get paid afterwards, and you'll be taken
care of. So if I did these 3 years in the Army, that probably I would have a chance to go to college. And that did work out exactly that way. Yeah.
Okay. So where did they send you first? I guess you first had to do training, boot camp. Where did you go first?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, so they I got on a train to Chicago.
Okay.
5 o'clock that next morning, my mother went insane because I walked in the house and I told them I just joined the Army. And my mother said, what? Well, when are you going? And I said, tomorrow morning.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And so I got to Chicago, went through all the tests and everything. So I think I probably got to the station around 8 in the morning. At 8 o'clock that night, they swore us in and put us on a bus. Went through O'Hare, and they flew us to Baton Rouge.
Really? Had you been on a plane before then?
First plane flight.
Wow.
That's why whenever anybody ever asks me when was your first plane flight, January 11, 1966. So I know exactly when it was. Flew us to Baton Rouge and then put us on a bus to Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Yeah. What was your impression of Fort Polk and Baton Rouge when you got there?
Okay. All right. So it's still it's 1966. So the first impression I got was that so all the soldiers that I went through basic training with, there would be some exceptions, but, like I would obviously be an exception, but for the most part, they were all from Chicago or somewhere close to Chicago, like me.
Okay.
Houston.
That's a difference.
A lot of the black guys were from Houston.
Yeah, okay.
And then Louisiana, because we were in Louisiana, right?
Right.
And so the first thing that struck me was that all of the Southerners were kind of behind with respect to popular culture and what's going on in the country. And that's not like, and I was a little behind, right? Because I'm from a small town. Yeah. So it wasn't like I was actually from Chicago.
So when you say behind,
I'll give you an example. So they made us, it's one of the Army routine type things, right? So by the time we actually got to Fort Polk, it must have been like 1 o'clock, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And there was a small rain falling. They made us stand outside for a couple hours.
Wow, okay.
Right, in the rain. And who knows what it was probably deliberate. Right, just already starting to grind you in to discipline you. And I remember we're talking to different soldiers standing around because you don't know anybody. People are introducing themselves to each other and all that. And there was a group from Louisiana of black and white soldiers. And I remember they were wearing, several of them were wearing bright orange and red trousers. Those had been popular when I was in the 7th grade.
Really? Okay. So this is years later.
So
okay.
they're like, they're almost 10 years behind.
Yeah.
With respect to that. And then they started talking, and I heard a couple of them say, one of them said, see you later, alligator.
Yeah.
The other one said, after a while, crocodile.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's something people in my area were talking that 10, 15 years ago.
Gotcha.
When I was a little kid, right? So they're behind in that sense. That was the first thing I kind of noticed.
Understood. Okay.
But, but it was cool. I made friends with several of the people from Houston and a couple of the guys from Louisiana. I still remember their names. This is like, almost 60 years ago now. Still remember a lot of these people's names. We became close friends within the context of that, knowing them for 8-9 weeks.
Yeah, okay. What was the treatment like? Did you feel that first of all, let me ask you this, were you instructed and trained by black soldiers, or that's the first question.
You got a mix. Yeah. So I said I never had a black teacher. And that question just made me realize that I should change that because we had some black drill instructors.
Okay.
We had black and white drill instructors. But so my first black teacher would have to be Sergeant Scott.
Okay.
So one of the black sergeants was Sergeant Scott. Yeah.
And what was that? What was it like? Did you feel that? I guess you were in your specific rank or in your group, so you didn't. I don't know if you had the chance to compare, but did you feel that there was a differential treatment even when you got there because of the fact that you were a group of black soldiers?
Okay, it's 1966. The Army is still desegregating.
Understood.
All right, so you have to put this in context. Think about if it's 1966. The typical person getting drafted is going to be around 20.
Yes.
So they were born in 1946, right? So if they were from the South, they grew up under Jim Crow, white or black.
Yeah.
Right? But now think in terms of the sergeants and the officers. They're older.
Yeah.
These are people who would have been born in probably for the most part during the 1930s and early 1940s. They were really grew up under Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And because soldiers are disproportionately from the South, the NCOs and officers were disproportionately white men who had grown up under Jim Crow in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. Right?
So they were this is status quo.
So they're they're dealing with the Army, which is telling them you got to be racially equal. You got to treat everybody with respect, and some of them are having a tougher time with that than others. Yeah. Right. Understood. And that's what I mean by we were undergoing. The Army was desegregating, and so there was a lot of different attitudes. I mean, there were a lot of fights. A lot of fights during basic training. Wow. I felt sorry for a lot of white guys, particularly white guys from the North, in which case here, this would be from Chicago. They were more middle class. They had messed up their grades. They were probably like flunked out of college or whatever and got drafted. Yeah. Right? These guys, you could tell, had never been in a fight. Yeah. And I'll never forget watching one of them in our barracks one time. And he got into an argument with another black guy from Chicago. Now, given the circumstance where I grew up, it was mostly a working class town. There's barely any black kids in it. So I had lots of fights. Yeah. And I turned out I was really good because I got boxing gloves for Christmas when I was 8. And I started getting actual lessons. You was trained. Okay, right. I got you. Because they knew what I was going to be facing. Yeah. And I'll never forget, they're standing in the middle of the barracks. And I said to myself, that white guy doesn't know he's about to get hit. Sorry. Because you could see from the posture of the black kid, he's about to throw a punch.
Yeah.
And the white kid is not putting himself into any kind of offensive or defensive stance.
Mm-hmm.
And bam, he just took the punch.
Yeah.
And so that was, a lot of that was going on.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had 3-4 fights myself. One of them was with a black kid.
Okay.
So that's just what's going on. You put a whole bunch of people between 18 and 23, 24 together.
You're going to have some issues.
Yeah, you're going to have some issues. But
Okay.
the race relations played a role. Most of the fights were black-white.
Interesting. Okay. And so when you finished basic training, where did you go first? What was your first station?
Let's back that up. There's one other thing I should say. I had a first lieutenant who could not stand me.
Yeah.
Right? He was from South Carolina. And he used to really try to make my time difficult.
Yeah.
Now, I think, looking back on it, well, I've realized this for some time now, part of this was also my fault because I was 18 and I was smart and I knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't suffer fools too well, and I didn't have enough sense to kind of like channel back that I'm talking to you, Lieutenant, and I know I'm smarter than you.
Yeah. And
so he already had problems with me, and that just made it worse.
Understood. Okay. What was the result of that? Was there constant antagonism from him? Was it any?
He got the last laugh.
Ah, okay.
But it was kind of interesting. We had he and I had two things that had, well, let me just give you an example of how he would mess with me. A couple examples. We would be on a march.
Okay.
Now it's a company. So there's like 4 platoons of about 40 guys each.
Plenty of people, okay.
Right.
Gotcha. Yes.
Yeah. So I was in, I think, the 1st platoon. So I'll never forget, whenever we would march, I'm in the 1st platoon, he was in the back behind the 4th. And so I'm way up in front of him. He would yell out, "Jaynes, stop bouncing." So he thought I had a streetwise shuffle walk, which I didn't because I was a country bumpkin.
Yeah.
I'm from this little small town.
Okay.
The first day I got to Fort Polk, that next day, and I was walking down the street, these 2 white sergeants were sitting in front of a building. I walked past them, and I'll never forget, one of them said to the other, he didn't whisper, and they were looking at me, and he said, "Straight from the block in Detroit." And I remember saying to myself, so this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
These people don't even know what they're talking about.
Understood.
Because I'm almost the opposite you could be from a block in Detroit.
Yeah.
I'm just, like I said, a country bumpkin, really. And so that's the way the lieutenant would treat me.
Gotcha.
So he'd keep yelling out, "Jaynes, stop bouncing." Another story with him. So I set 2 records at Fort Polk for people in basic training.
Okay.
First one was a good record. They told me at the end, like in the next to last week, they give you a written test where you gotta go through all the stuff you're supposed to have learned.
Okay.
But then they also give you these physical PT tests where you do stuff like, one of the things was you had to run a mile, and then another thing was that you had to do other kind of physical type things like crawl on a jungle gym as fast as you could and do things like that, right?
Okay.
Well, they told me that I had the highest combined score for the written and the physical test that had ever been recorded.
Whoa.
At Fort Polk.
Understood.
All right. So that was cool.
Yeah.
Right. The bad thing was I pulled KP more times than anybody.
What's that? What's KP?
KP is kitchen patrol or kitchen police. Basically, it means you got to go work in the kitchen.
Okay.
See, soldiers eat in the mess hall, and they have regular army people or civilians who cook the meals. Yeah. But soldiers clean the hall, wash the dishes, mop the floors, that sort of stuff. Okay. Right? And we all had to take turns. So the typical person who went to, who was in my basic training unit, probably did KP 2, maybe 3 times. I did it 7.
Man.
Every time though was the same lieutenant.
I see. So this was punishment.
He's punishing me for something, and sometimes maybe I did something, sometimes probably I didn't. But every time he's looking for me to do something. Yeah. Right? So he and I are not getting along. Right? The other thing was, 2 more stories about him, but he's gonna get the last laugh. Was that we had training with bayonet fighting. Okay. Right? Yeah. So, but they don't give you bayonets, obviously. Yeah, it's like, So they give you these things that call pugil sticks. Okay. So they're sticks with soft stuff on the end. But you can really go at it. Yeah. So they teach you some basic moves and things like that. And after you've been in the training for a while, they actually put 2 people together and they have them fight. Yeah. Right? So I was put out with this one guy who he and I had some words with each other too. We didn't like it was a white guy, and we weren't like enemies or anything, but we kind of got a little spirited. A little beef, okay, right? I got you. So we're going at it rough, and I'm trying my best to try to take his head off with this bugle stick. And I noticed a whistle blow, and we don't stop. And I noticed the lieutenant coming up behind me to stop us. Yeah. And I go, bam! No! Put that stick right in his chest, knock him down. Oh. Right? So that was my high point getting even with him. He probably had just put me on KP a couple times that week. Yeah. Right? So how he gets the last laugh, at the end of basic training, everyone goes in the Army, you're a private E1. Okay. Right? And an E3 gets that private little 1 stripe. Okay. But they take the top 5%, 10%, something like that, of the people in each company at graduation, and they promote them early to E2. Okay. So the night before our graduation, the sergeant in charge of our barracks comes to me and he says, Jaynes, you've been promoted. I said, okay, great, because you're going to get a salary raise and all that. And then that means you're going to get E3 with that stripe quicker than anybody else, right? Exactly. So next day we're getting promoted and they have a little ceremony. And a lot of the soldiers, like all the ones that were from Louisiana, they had like family members and girlfriends. Gotcha. You know, maybe some of them he had wives. They came to the ceremony. They had bleachers set up, people sitting in the ceremony. So at the end of the ceremony, the company commander comes out and stands in the middle. We're outside in the field. And he says, "Okay, now we're going to announce all the names of the people who got promoted." Yeah. And he says, "You know who you are, so just come on out and stand in the middle. You know where this is going." Wow. So we go out. So I go out. They told me right the night before that I was promoted. So he starts calling off names, and then people would go up and they'd hand them their promotion orders and stuff. So finally he gets down. You can see he got 1 sheet left, and there's 2 of us standing there. And I'm like, are you with the wrong thinking? No. What I'm thinking is, I wonder why this guy's out here. I feel sorry for him. And then he calls some other name. And so I'm standing there and I'm like, and all those people were there and I'm thinking, boy, I wanted to hide in the grass, in a blade of grass or something. So the company commander says, Jaynes, see me after the ceremony. So I go see him and he says that that morning, the lieutenant had come and looked at the list, saw my name, and struck it off. Wow. So he got the last laugh. He got the last laugh. Right. Wow. Okay. Wow. That's going to lead me into another question later on when it comes to discrimination in the workplace too. But we'll get to that one. That's crazy. Wow. So you went from Fort Polk in Louisiana, Fort Benning, Georgia. So that's in Columbus. So it's first trip to New Orleans. Okay. Because when when I left Fort Polk, they put me on a train, and it was an overnight trip, and I actually got one of those sleeping berths. And we went to New Orleans first, and then went back up to Georgia.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? So that was my first time I ever was in New Orleans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I spent the summer of '66 in Fort Benning.
Okay.
Columbus, Georgia, which is still, still same.
Still very segregated for
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on there. I always tell people, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had just gone into effect July 1, 1965. This is like, when I'm down there, it's like June, July, August of '66.
Yeah.
So strictly speaking, things like movie theaters and all that were desegregated.
Yes.
But it turns out black people didn't go to the white theater in Columbus.
Really?
So I always, whenever I meet someone from Columbus, I always tell them, I desegregated your movie theater.
Really?
Yeah. So I met this girl.
Well.
Yeah. I met this girl in Columbus at a dance. She was there. She was actually a high school senior.
Okay.
Right? So she probably like 17, 18, but I was, at this time now, I had turned 19.
Okay, gotcha.
So, I met her, got her phone number and stuff. So she and I were going to go on a date, so we're going to go to the movies.
Okay.
And I remember I prepared, got the newspaper. They had 2 theaters. And I picked the movie I wanted to go to.
Yeah.
So I picked her up, and she said something. I said, yeah, we're going to go to this movie. And she says, what movie? And I told her, she said, that's at the whatever that theater was. She said, we don't go there. So it turns out that was what had always been the white theater.
Yeah.
And they went to the black theater.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I want to see this movie. We're going there tonight.
Yeah.
And so she was a little uneasy, but she went. And we get to the theater. Some people looked at us, but nobody said anything.
Yeah.
Right? And what I do know is, so we got through that with nothing happening. But the interesting thing is, her parents would never let her go out with me again. Because I was...
So you was dangerous.
Yeah, I was dangerous.
Okay.
But I already knew I was dangerous because before I left Fort Polk, I had gone to a small town in Mississippi because I wanted to see a cotton plantation.
Okay.
And,
wow. It's just a tour just to see what it was like.
Yeah, I had never seen cotton.
Wow. Okay.
And remember, in my hometown, everybody who wasn't, except for about 3 families, everybody who wasn't related to my mother had come from Mississippi and Tennessee.
Okay.
So I had 2 or 3 friends who were my age whose parents had come from Mississippi.
Right.
And one of them's grandmother used to come up there all the time. I knew her well, Mrs. Smith. So I called her when we got this 2-day pass for the weekend.
Okay.
And told her I'd like to come up and visit her.
Okay.
And she said, great, So I got on a bus and went to Mississippi. It was not too far from Clarksdale, where Muddy Waters is from.
Okay, yeah.
Right? And just to make the story short, I got there Friday night, Saturday early afternoon, me and her granddaughter, who was another teenage girl, were going to go to the Dairy Queen to get ice cream.
Okay.
Unbeknownst to me, they had a white people's window and a colored people's window.
Yeah.
So when I get there, but the colored people's window was kind of around the corner, so you can't see it. So I walked up to the white people's window, which didn't say anything, and ordered the ice cream. And the white teenage girl who was behind the counter looked at me kind of funny. And then finally she said, you need to come around to the side.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Right? Show you how naive I was.
Just
wasn't thinking.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
And I said, this is okay. And she said, and she said, you don't understand. You got to come around. You need to come around to the side. So at that point, then I'm looking at the girl. She's kind of backing away. So anyway, the sheriff shows up because I was in the military. He didn't do anything.
Yeah.
But he told me I had to be on the next bus.
Wow.
And it didn't matter which direction it was going. So I got run out of Mississippi.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the first colored sign I ever saw.
What was it like to, because, you know, once again, you said you were in a place where there were already so few black people that you didn't have the opportunity to have that kind of segregation. What was it like to experience that, her reaction to you breaking that norm? And then was your interaction with the sheriff like, we hear so many horror stories from Mississippi. Was it insinuating something like, or get on this bus or else?
Oh, it was definitely, if I didn't get on that bus, it was going to be some problems for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I was on the bus. But but all the black people, they was going to have me on the bus anyway.
Yeah.
Because like you said a few minutes ago, I was dangerous in the South.
Yeah.
Because when I saw that colored sign, that was like, there is no way I'm going to this colored sign. Now, I could have just walked away, but I wasn't doing that either.
Yeah.
Because it's back to what my grandmother had told me.
Yeah.
Can't ever be disrespected.
Yeah.
I was willing to die before I would go to that colored window.
Yeah.
I'd have died.
Wow. I think about, I just think about, I think there's so many things like in the South to this day. You talk about how this is after the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. So desegregation was this is federally supported. You're not supposed to do this.
Yeah, the law had passed, but in these small towns, out in the more rural areas, they still going along just like they had.
And I think even before. To this day, in many cases, the law is there, but the norm and the expectation that there's still an expectation of deference. There's still a status quo that exists.
Yeah, there is.
Unspoken,
there is. And there was this clash with people who grew up in these northern areas. And my situation was even worse in a sense because my people hadn't grown up under Jim Crow either. So they weren't teaching us how to act. You would hear stories, but nobody was teaching you. They're telling you the opposite.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And so my late wife had the same thing. Her parents were from Alabama.
Wow. Okay.
And she grew up in Illinois. And she told me how when she was 13, which would have been 1960, she was the same age as me, she was sent to Alabama to visit her grandmother. She's supposed to be there for a month. Yeah. She lasted about half a week. Wow. Because she got sent to the store and she didn't call the white storekeeper sir. And then when he insisted she call him sir, she wouldn't do it. Yeah. And so they had to pack her up and send her back.
Y'all got some bold spirits, and I'm glad for that. I'm very glad for that. Yeah. Because I think that's looking back on. I think there's we'll get into different civil rights stuff later on, but I think just that spirit of not willing to accept certain things is what got us different things. And so
it is. It's absolutely what it is. That's the whole difference. People think like the sit-ins. That's when it all starts, right? The Montgomery bus boycott and the sit-ins is when black people, mostly people who grew up in cities and small towns, just decided they weren't going to take it anymore. Yeah. Right? And they went to those lunch counters. Some brave people. Yeah. Went to those lunch counters, let people spit on them, beat them, haul them off, handcuff them, take them to jail. Yeah. We owe everything to those college students and other students that were joining in with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree.
But they were approaching it the same way I was. I was willing, if the sheriff beat me up, he was just going to be beating me up because I wasn't going to accept that kind of treatment. Yeah. And nobody can tell me I can't go to that movie theater. In fact, my spirit was such that if they told me I can't go, that's where I'm going.
Yeah. Understood.
Right.
man, did it, and how did this change? I think you're answering this question, but I want to ask it explicitly just to see how did experiencing this othering. I want to use that word specifically. Othering meaning, and I know but othering meaning people treating you as an other. People treating you as you are not a part of them, as you are less than, as you are excluded. How did that make you see yourself as a young man at that time?
Okay. Well, let's back this up a little bit. I'm gonna answer that.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't want to give the maybe I've given the wrong understanding of what things were like in my hometown.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like we were all totally integrated and all the white folks and us were all like this. I mean, I had lots of white friends. My parents had white friends.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother went to the same schools that I went to.
Understood.
But socially, there was some separation.
Okay.
We just didn't have Jim Crow.
Understood.
We could go to any store we wanted to go to, movie theater, do whatever you want. Schools were all the same and all that. But there was no interracial dating, for example. See, I never had a date.
Okay.
I used to tell people I must be the only high school kid in America who was captain. I was on my sophomore football team. I was captain of the team, and I can't get a date.
Man.
Because there was 8 black people in my high school.
Yeah. Wow.
And all of the girls were my sister and my cousins.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I had a kind of arrested dating development, but that's a whole nother story.
Okay.
So.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like. So that's kind of what it was like. So it wasn't like I had white friends. I went to their house. They come to my house. We would do things like all that. But then again, kids might be having birthday parties, and I wouldn't know about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Understood. Okay. So so not to say that you were introduced to this othering or this treatment when you got to the South, but how was the extreme, because this was more extreme nature.
Yeah, right. It's more extreme. So the reason why I wanted to set that straight was I was used to being othered.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Because I was always othered in the sense that until I went to college, I was only in a classroom with a person of color once.
Wow.
That was my first cousin. He and I are only 50-some days apart, and we had freshman English in high school together, and that's the only time I was ever in a classroom with another person of color.
Wow.
Right? So so we were definitely othered. Yeah, so when we get down south and people are just putting it in your face, we're just fighting back against it.
Yeah. Okay.
All the time.
Did you?
I mean, you want to know how bad it was? In Columbus, I will never forget, I'm walking down the street alone in a black area.
Yeah.
And there's an elderly couple, black couple, walking ahead of me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was obvious they had to be at least in their 70s. Now keep in mind, it's still 1966. People in their 70s back then look old.
Yeah. Okay.
So there was no way anybody could not look at them and not know that this is a very senior elderly couple. A car full of white teenage boys drove up and threw big rocks at them.
Wow.
I'll never forget, I picked up one of them and fired it through the back of their car.
Goodness.
And then took off. I took off running at that point. But it also just shows the things that they have been told.
Yeah.
And how they've been raised.
Exactly.
And what was going on then. But
wow.
Is that back rolling?
Yeah, I didn't stop. I'm just going to edit it.
Because I wanted to tell you something else
Go ahead.
too. This happened in Columbus. This is a good story. Right? Because there's good
and bad.
Good folks, good white folks. And I was at the train station in Columbus. I'm just a private. And I think I was paying for some tickets at the counter. And this white woman walks up to me. And she says, "Young man, you dropped a bill." I looked down at my feet. There's a $20 bill I had dropped out of my wallet while I was paying for those tickets. Now, you know, it's 1966. I'm a private. $20 was a bunch of money to me. So that woman was being very nice. Because, you know, if I had walked away from that counter, somebody would have had my money.
Wow. Okay. So you got both experiences.
Right.
You got both experiences. Okay. Wow. I want to shift to Vietnam.
Okay. Before we do that, I want to say one other thing about.
Please do.
Because we talked about the difference at that time between being North and the South.
Yeah.
This is a whole different perspective.
Okay.
My high school was very good in sports. The best player on the basketball team was a white guy who later on ended up being starting point guard for the University of Illinois.
Okay.
He was an excellent athlete. So you know what? It's high school.
Yeah.
So he was the best basketball player. He was one of the best football players. He's good in everything.
You did everything,
Yeah, his name was Jody. He's a great guy.
Okay.
I've been knowing him since like 11 years old or something.
Okay.
Right? So, interestingly, we also had a center, nice, tall, big guy, could shoot well. He was also white. Jody and the center were recruited to Alabama.
Really?
University of Alabama. They were the first guys in the North recruited to play basketball for the University of Alabama.
Okay.
They would have been freshmen in 1965.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I already told you Jody plays for Illinois.
Yeah.
So when I get out of the Army, I go to Illinois. And it's Jody's last term.
Gotcha.
And so I'm walking on campus early that summer, and Jody's coming down the street.
Okay.
Say, "Hey, Jody, Jerry," right? And we, exchange greetings, start talking. And I don't remember who brought it up, but I remember him telling me, he said, "We got down to Alabama. It was horrible."
Wow.
He said, "We could not stand the way they were treating the black people." And he said, "I couldn't take it, and I left after one semester."
Wow. Wow. That's integrity too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I should preface all that. The people who had come from Mississippi, the parents of my friends, I used to hear, they would tell stories about being in Mississippi during their childhood in the 30s. So I was always biased about Mississippi.
Yeah.
So I did not expect it to be a good place to be.
Yeah. I think it's a common thread that Mississippi is labeled with the fullness of racial violence of this country, and it didn't happen just in Mississippi, but I think it happened especially in Mississippi in a way that made people label it in that way.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Mississippi had that rough reputation.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about your time in Vietnam, and basically I just started with what was it like for you to go to Vietnam? This is your first time out of the country too, and what was it like?
Well, technically I had been to Canada
when
when I was a little boy.
Excuse me. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, but
okay. Yeah. Of course.
But yeah. Man, it was like, it's surreal.
Yeah.
For a while, because you're not, especially when you're young, you haven't done many things and all that. It's almost like this stuff isn't even really happening.
Yeah. And
reality hasn't set in on you.
Yeah.
They flew us out to Oakland, California, and put us on a ship.
Wow.
And a merchant mariner. It took us 18 days to cross the Pacific.
Wow.
To land in Vietnam. But we did get a wake up immediately, man. I mean, the ship harbored and there were these, I hesitate to call them mountains, but really big hills.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there was some enemy activity going on up in those hills.
Wow.
And as soon as we landed, these American jets strafed the side of that hill back and forth about 5-6 times. So you, and you could see all that firepower going up and all that stuff. And so we turned and looked at each other and said, "This is a war."
Welcome, welcome to war.
This is
Yeah.
a war.
Wow.
And then they put us out and gave us our M16s, and they put us on these flatbed trucks and had us sit back to back.
Wow.
And told us, "You gotta stay alert."
Yeah.
And then they drove us to the base camp where we were going to had to set up camp. And I don't remember how long the trip was now, but it was at least an hour, maybe a couple.
Wow. So when you got there, you're in this completely different. I've heard people describe Vietnam as just being so almost a different world, just because of the different landscape, the different
Beautiful.
Wow.
Gorgeous. I got some pictures, boy. One of the most beautiful scenes I ever saw was there was a little. I used to ride. One of my jobs, I rode shotgun on a mail truck that went into Saigon and back every day. And one morning, there's a little bridge. It's called Highway 1. There's a little bridge on it. And one morning, we get to that bridge, and I looked over to the side, and I said to the driver, "Stop." And he stopped, and there were several women in a rice paddy, and they were bent over working in that rice paddy.
Wow.
And the water, it was Vietnam in 66, 7. And so they didn't have a lot of industry, so the water was still pretty pristine, the river. And so the water was nice and clean looking. But the thing that struck me was like, there were shades of green going down. That green kept getting lusher and deeper till it got down to the last part just before the water. Yeah. And it was just a gorgeous scene. Then the women had on these traditional, peasant outfits and things. I have that picture, but it was really something.
Wow. Okay. What did it, let me ask you this. So when you're seeing the striking beauty of this country, when you're seeing all this, what did it conflict the fact that you were at war? Did it make you feel?
Yeah, because you start, one of the things you think is we're here tearing this thing up. Yeah. Right? But you got to keep in mind, you got to go back to where I'm from. Yeah. Right? So, so there was a lot of controversy, obviously, over being in Vietnam. And it was going to come to a real head during 67 which is most of the time I was there. Wow. Because I got there in late, like a couple weeks after Thanksgiving in 66. So most of my time there was 67. And, but where I'm from, everybody was Republicans. Okay. And it's a small town, downstate Illinois. I'm talking 99.9% Republicans. Okay. And
is this 60s Republicans or is this present day Republicans?
No, this is even there. They aren't the kind of Republicans.
Understood. Okay.
They're like MAGA.
Okay, understood.
For the most part. Yeah. Because I was happy to see, because I was home last spring and I looked up how the county had voted in the 2020 election. I knew Trump was going to win but he only won by about 4 or 5 points. Interesting. So that made me feel, because a lot of them places like that, Trump would get 80% of the vote. Yeah. Right, but he was in like the low 50s there. Okay. So it's but it's bedrock Republicans. Yeah. Okay. Right. And so there was no anti-war. Yeah. Right?
You hadn't even, this is not your perspective. You're
That's not even something to think about. We're at war.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I'll never forget when we were preparing. We were still in Georgia, preparing to go over. President Johnson would come on. He's talking about we're going to bomb Haiphong Harbor in North Vietnam, in Hanoi, and the war is going to be over. Okay. So we were all for it.
Yeah,
right.
It was an in and out.
We're
Yeah,
not thinking about anything else, but
yeah.
we're gonna be over in a week. We might not even have to go.
Mm.
You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But once I got there, then all that changed.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a Vietnamese woman
Mm.
who I talked to on a roadside stand on one day off that mail truck, who kind of made me realize, I'll never forget. So I got into this conversation with her. We had stopped to get Cokes. And for some reason, I got into a conversation with her that day, and I learned that her brother fought on our side and her husband was fighting on the other side.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, that's a civil war.
Yeah.
You know, why are we here?
Yeah. Wow.
So ideas about it started changing.
Wow. I'm wondering, I'm going to ask you this question. I want to see where you go with it. So you stated in a previous interview that you looked up to Muhammad Ali, and you also, this is probably, I'm not familiar with exactly when Muhammad Ali decided not to go to Vietnam, right?
Yeah, it would have been while I was there.
Wow. Okay.
Probably 67, because I think 67 is when they take his heavyweight crown.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah, the question I was going
It's
to
either late 66 or sometime in 67.
Okay. The question I was going to ask was basically, you know, did you feel an apprehension of fighting because of, you know, your the way you view Muhammad Ali? But I guess, like you said, you answered
No.
this is really,
Yeah, right, because I didn't know he would take that position yet when I was already, so I'm already over there.
Yeah.
But by the time when I get back and he takes that position, I'm fine with it.
Understood. Yeah. Okay.
I should tell you also, I have no problems with anybody who back then went to Canada, avoided the draft or anything like that. I just say they're just more informed and sophisticated than I was.
Understood.
Right? So most of us small town boys, we just going.
It was a means to an end for you as well. It was different. It wasn't about the
Yeah. So who I have a problem with are the people who years later are all war hawks, but they never went.
Understood.
Didn't join, avoided the draft.
Yeah.
And there were plenty of them.
Understood. Okay.
A lot of politicians took that. I have more respect for someone who went to Canada.
Yeah. Because at least they took a stance.
They took a stance and they had their conviction. And going to Canada still requires some level of courage, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know how that's going to work out.
No, you don't.
You could end up in jail, in prison.
I'm wondering what, and it seems like you already had a strong sense of, it seemed like you already believed and knew that you were entitled to the rights of a citizen before you went. How did your view of your patriotism, your citizenship change when you have served your country?
Okay, so I was always very optimistic about, I'm way more pessimistic now.
Well, yeah.
Right, like everybody else, I guess.
Yeah.
Than I ever was, because I was always optimistic how we were gonna, we're gonna all get along.
Yeah.
Like Rodney King wanted.
Yeah. Wow.
But let me answer that with another story.
Okay.
So I literally came back from Vietnam by plane Halloween, 1967.
Okay.
That was a heck of a thing itself because they actually had the plane painted black and orange for Halloween.
What? Okay. Yeah.
And I'll never forget, the plane landed in San Francisco. I got off the plane. It was late at night. And the first thing I did, I looked around and I said, USA, back home. And I literally got down on the tarmac and kissed the ground.
Wow.
Then I got up, but the next thing that I did was I said to myself, I'm going to become successful and I'll never be poor.
Wow.
No matter what.
What was the reason for that? What do you think brought that conviction on?
I guess knowing there's the struggle.
Yeah.
And still seeing, the struggle still evident.
Yeah.
In the military, even in Vietnam during wartime, knowing that I had made a sacrifice for the country, and not that they owed me anything.
Okay. Right?
Because you're supposed to answer the call.
Yeah.
But, well, they did owe me something. They owed me equal treatment.
Yeah.
That's what they owed me. Nothing special, but equal treatment.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't gonna, I was gonna be taking a stand the rest of my life.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that was true for black GIs coming back from World War II and soldiers from World War I too. I think that wartime service kind of changes your outlook on things.
Yeah.
Right? Now let me also add to this in case this doesn't come up. Clearly, joining the Army was a momentous decision for me, but it's the most important decision I ever made. Paid off.
Yeah.
I would never take it back.
Okay.
And I won't say I look fondly on being in the military.
Okay.
But you meet people from all over the United States, and you learn how wonderful the people are.
Yeah.
Right. So the military is a great institution.
Yeah.
Tell people that.
Okay.
Even though at that time it was struggling hard to contain demographic change.
Okay. Noted. Okay. I want to ask you about, and I've read this a little before, but I want to ask you. So when you left the military, went back to Illinois, that led into you eventually going to school and becoming an economist. Can you tell me a little bit about how you made that decision and how it started for you?
Yeah. Actually, when I came back from Vietnam, I still had 13 months left in the Army.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they sent me to Massachusetts.
Really? Okay.
And so I got to see a whole new part of the country because I'd never been to New England.
Yeah.
I was literally like about 25 minutes south of Boston, southwest of Boston, I think. And couple things, met some new really great people there. Got recruited into a unit where we had a basketball team that won a championship.
All right.
Right? Still got the picture of all those guys that was taken right after we won that championship game. So that was a great experience. The other thing, a couple months, maybe not even a month before I was about to get out of the Army, I got on a plane. I had a 3-day pass. And I got on the plane. I decided I'm going to home. So I'm flying from Boston to Chicago.
Yeah.
And I get on this plane. Now, unbeknownst to me, it's a Friday afternoon. And back then, the American Economic Association had its annual meetings in December.
Okay.
And it's always in a major city.
Okay.
Well, happened to be it was that weekend, and it was in Chicago.
Okay.
So when I got on that plane, entire plane is full of Boston area economists.
Okay.
Right? Plane leaves. You gotta remember, it's 1967 for weather forecasting, and it's not like it is today.
Right. Okay.
Right? We get hit, a big blizzard, snow blizzard hits the Midwest, and they close O'Hare while we're in the air.
Okay.
Today that likely wouldn't happen because they at least know that thing was coming.
Understood.
Right? So we don't get to go to Chicago. They land us in Cleveland, I think. We spend the night in Cleveland. And then the next day, they try to take us to Chicago and they can't do it, and they send us to Omaha.
Y'all just bouncing around.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I ended up getting to Chicago Sunday morning on a train.
And you left on Friday?
I left on Friday afternoon.
Okay.
So I spent the weekend with all these economists from the Boston area.
Okay.
You know, I'm talking to them, and so they find out, like, you know, I'm in the Army, and I'm about to get out. What you gonna do when you get out? And I'm telling them I'm gonna go to college. Well, you gotta take economics. Take economics.
You got the accent.
So I promised them that I would take economics.
Okay.
And especially this one older gentleman, he was an economist, he was an economic historian, Ben Seligman.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught at the University of Massachusetts Amherst.
Okay.
And I really made good friends with him and his wife on that train from Omaha to Chicago. And I promised him that when I got to school, I'd take an econ class.
Okay. And yeah, let me ask you, how did that influence the way that you looked at the way you grew up? How did that influence the way that you looked at your experiences in the South? How did that,
going to school or what?
Becoming an economist.
Oh, well, it wasn't yet.
Okay.
So I said I'd take this economics course. It was okay, I liked it. But I actually I had a humanities requirement I needed to take. Mm-hmm. And I took Introduction to Philosophy.
Okay.
And that's like blew my mind. You know, I'm like a kind of a nerdy intellectual in that way, and just reading philosophers was fantastic.
Okay.
And David Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, that was like, I was like, man, I gotta take more of this stuff. So I ended up getting, my bachelor's was in philosophy. Okay. Because at the time I was thinking I was gonna go to law school.
Okay.
Right? So it didn't really matter what I majored in. So, but I took math and econ too. But the BA was philosophy. Okay. But then at the end, I decided I didn't want to go to law school. I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I applied for a fellowship, which I got. And they sent me to Springfield. We talked about the Springfield race riot. Yeah. I ended up working for Cecil Partee, who was the black president pro tem of the Illinois State Senate. Okay. And Harold Washington, who was a representative who would later become the first black mayor of Chicago. Okay. So the year after I got out of college, that's who I was a great opportunity. Hanging around, right? Yeah. Learning a few things from them and other people at the Illinois State Legislature. Okay. And during that year, I decided to go to econ. Okay. All right. I got you. Because they didn't have a whole lot of jobs for philosophers.
Still don't.
A graduate student I knew who was in philosophy had told me that the year I graduated, there was one job for an assistant professor in philosophy in the whole United States.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I said, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, set yourself up a little bit.
So and then also, the other component to that was I went to, it's in the library, and I was actually looking at the American Economic Review, which is those red books up there at the top shelf. Okay. And I happened to pull one of the books out, because this is when I was thinking about economics, so I went to the library. And when I opened it up, the first on the inside cover, there was this black face staring out at me. And it was Sir Arthur W. Lewis, who wasn't at that time, but he became a Nobel laureate, right? And he's from the Caribbean, and he at that time was teaching at Princeton. And I looked at that black face smiling out, and I said, "Oh, they got black people in economics."
They got black people. Okay.
And I read a little biography of him, and I said, "Well, I've been like kind of waffling on what I was going to do." I said, "I'm gonna go for the econ." Okay. And then the econ, you get to do math, but you also are working on stuff that entails people. So it was so you feel like you're doing something worthwhile, but it's also intellectually stimulating.
Okay. I want to bring us to a shift. Okay. I really want to ask you a couple questions from your perspective as an economist and with that background, given the current state of the United States as well as just looking at U.S. history, right? So the first one I really want to ask you, so if a person was to ask you now, looking at the current economic state of America, and you talked about how basically you lived through the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. If they're to say, man, we've been, 60 years removed from federal equality, right? How do you explain the state of Black people? And they want to know why certain people still don't have as much as others. How would you explain why Black people don't have that equality that was supposed to be federally mandated 60 years ago?
I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial.
Please do.
But there's two levels. There's the usual, still a whole lot of inequality and unequal treatment going on.
Okay.
And then we got so many Black people kind of stuck away in these urban and then also rural silos where the opportunities aren't really available.
Okay.
And it's easy to go down the wrong path.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. That's something many people would say. The controversial part will be the following. I think 300 years of history in America.
Yeah.
For at least 250 of those years, Black people, for the most part, were being oppressed and beat down.
Yeah.
And had to have psychological defense mechanisms.
Yeah.
A lot of Black men have been crushed. And that's part of why, every time we read somebody robbed this gas station or somebody did this or that, we think, well, it's probably going to be a Black person, or I hope it's not a Black person, or something like that. And a lot of that's going on because of that. And it didn't just start recently.
No.
We were getting crushed and oppressively treated in the cities in particular from before America was even America.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, take an example. In the book that I'm working on right now, the second chapter, I start out talking about, trying to get at some of these issues. I start out talking about Crispus Attucks.
Yes. Okay.
Right? And I call Crispus Attucks the first Black urban male, which obviously that's metaphorical.
Understood.
But think about him. Who is Crispus Attucks? Crispus Attucks is a runaway slave living in Boston. He's still a fugitive probably at the time of the Boston Massacre when he gets shot and killed by the British soldiers. Right? But in the trial of those British soldiers, Attucks comes to the forefront as one of the leaders of the people of the group who are challenging the British.
Yeah.
Right? And so I stop and I think, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Think about the stereotype of the Black male. This is 1770.
Yeah.
Stereotype of the Black male is what? It's the plantation Negro.
Yeah.
Who's bowing to massa and doing whatever he's told to do, and we know that there's exceptions to that. People are surreptitiously doing things, but that the typical is you're living as a slave and you're doing that, and everybody's demeaning themselves and being obedient. And all of a sudden I'm looking at, here's this Crispus Attucks leading this group of people marching down the street, and they're talking like he's loud and boisterous. Who is he? What's doing that?
Yeah.
And I said, he's a type.
Okay.
And there's these, and America's cities, North and South, been creating those people, that type.
So what do you think contributes to the creation? So
he's not going to be disrespected either.
Yeah.
See, I was taught not to be disrespected.
Understood.
And I went pretty strong at that. I'm lucky that I'm 20 in 1967 and not 20 in 1937.
Yeah.
Or 1897.
Yeah. Understood.
Right? Or I wouldn't be kicked out of Mississippi, I'd be dead.
Yeah. Very plainly.
Right.
Yes.
But these people there's still many people like that, but they might be living in 2024, but the situation where they are is crowding them, or at least it's making them think that they're being crowded, right?
Yeah.
And they go to schools that are worthless. And it's not clear, people say, well, why don't you buckle down and work in school or whatever? For a lot of them, it's not clear that would pay off if the schools are so bad.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
So they made a decision to take on a different kind of identity and to face life differently.
Yeah.
It's a choice they make.
I think that's a very insightful take. And I think it changes the narrative of, I think many people see that type of response as, they try to pathologize it in a way that's like, this is an individual problem, this person is this person is this, but they don't look at, how does this happen? They don't look at, why is this response coming? Why does this person have to feel disrespected in the first place to then act this way?
And and you think, why should black people?
Yeah.
See, that's one of the problems. Even the social scientists, a lot of academic writing is like, you put a black person in this situation, they should act just like if you put a white person in that situation, or if you put an Asian or a Latinx person. Well, each one of those might act differently in the situation, but the black is going to diverge from the white more.
Yeah.
For these historical reasons.
Yeah.
Right? It comes back to all these choices. See, I argue that throughout most history, so everybody tries to have respect.
Yeah.
But there's two kinds of respect. You got your personal respect, your dignity as a human being, what you can live with.
Yeah.
Right? I can live with this kind of behavior, that I did this and not that. Then you got public respect, where people are saying that you're a nice person, you maybe follow the rules or whatever, right? But it's nice if you can get all that.
Yeah.
But throughout most of American history, this is the premise of the book that I'm working on. Black people can't have both of those.
Yeah.
Because public respect automatically, because public respect for the most part requires that white people are giving you respect.
And that's oftentimes seen as a deferral of power.
Yeah, because you got to follow the rules.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which automatically undermines your self-respect.
Exactly.
So you got to make a choice. And a lot of times you try to, evade doing either one, but you still have to make choices, like whether you go to that colored people's window or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And you're going to see, if I had gone to that colored people's window, even if I had just turned away and left, we're sitting here, I don't know if I'd be telling you about it because I'd be in shame.
Yeah. Understood.
That would be something that would have lived with me my entire life. I would die. That might be one of the things I'm thinking about on my deathbed. I wish I hadn't done that.
Wow. Yeah.
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 Right. So to a lot of people, whether I accept the life that looks like it's been chartered for me, or I do a life of crime, become a thug. Those look like the only two choices I have. Thuggishness, I think, at a certain period of my youth is going to at least give me self-respect.
Yeah.
I mean, turns out later you realize that's not the case.
Sometimes it might gain you public respect though. And I think that's the other thing.
Well, public respect within a limited public.
Not within everybody, but within your community.
Within a limited
it's going to
public.
give you understood.
It's like Tupac made my decisions, do or die.
Yeah.
He's talking exactly about that.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just a young black male, cursed since my birth.
You made a statement earlier. You said you were ready to die before being disrespected. That's the same thing Tupac was saying in terms of death before dishonor. That's the same.
Exactly.
That's the same word. Yeah.
Exactly. What I'm saying, all these thoughts, millions and millions of blacks, men and women, have thought the same things. I just, cause I'm a professor, get to sit back and think about it. And they actually paid me to think about this kind of stuff, right? So I can have a better chance to try to articulate it.
Yeah.
But then I can't articulate it any better than Tupac or Biggie Smalls or...
Yeah. Man. Okay. Let me ask you this. Can you talk about a little bit of how economics as a field has allowed you to grapple with the idea of the tangible financial effects of segregated neighborhoods, segregated education environments, and even workforces?
Yeah, it does. Man, actually, the lecture I gave this morning in my education in policy class hangs on that, because we're talking about how you finance schools.
Gotcha.
And segregation plays an incredibly important role in that, right? Not as much now as it used to, but still there. But just go back to 1937 as an example, right? If you're in a city, and it doesn't have to be one of the biggest cities, right? Could be some medium-sized city. You're still going to be in a segregated area, right? And they're paying for the schools with local property taxes.
Yeah.
And they got all the black folks confined into this one area, and they don't have opportunities to start businesses outside that area, or to do many different kinds of things. So their tax base is going to be lower. Yeah. Because they got a lower tax base, it's going to be more difficult to get insurance, loans, all those kinds of things are just devastating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think of even how that continues to this day, because I think about town I grew up in, Tallahassee, Florida. It is not a segregated town in the way that black people only live in certain specific areas, but there are places in Tallahassee where there's way more black people, and there are places in Tallahassee where there's way more white people. Right? And if you talk to people that have been in Tallahassee for over 40, 50 years, they will tell you there was a time where the city was segregated basically on the railroad tracks. They will tell you.
Just like Atlanta.
Exactly.
Atlanta had a highway. I forget which highway it was.
Probably 75.
Yeah, probably.
Or maybe 20. Is it 75 or 20? I'm not sure.
Anyway, basically, the banks wouldn't do any lending. On the black side of that highway.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I think about even the way that I wonder how you feel that factors in when it comes to workplaces as well. Because I think when it comes to education, when it comes to housing, we can see how those are clearly related. Can you tell me a little bit about how segregation then affected people's abilities to get jobs, to get careers that would pay them enough to support their family, or to pay them enough to advance, out of poverty?
Well, it wasn't so much segregation residentially that was messing people up for jobs. There is a literature which I disagree with, and I'll mention that hangs on that question.
Okay.
But it's segregation at the workplace. Was the killer. Okay. I mean, if you go back, since we're picking on 1937, that's a good place to sort of center these thoughts. What is the major employer in the southern states? It's textile mills. They don't hire black folks. They hire some black men to be janitors and to work outside where you might pull the cotton off the railroad line and set it there and take it inside the factory. Those kinds of jobs. And very few jobs for women. but lots of white women working there.
Mm.
These are not dream jobs by any thoughts, but it's better jobs than the ones the blacks had.
Understood.
Right? So they just segregated out of that.
Understood.
And it's the major employer.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the thing that you have to think about. Segregation is the key to understanding. That's how blacks were kept down. No access to the better opportunities on any level, whether it's schools or jobs or recreational activities. Parks are segregated.
I have some more questions, but there's one specifically that's coming to mind, and I'm trying to think about it still to frame it right. When I was in the car on the way up, I was listening to basically a discussion talking about W.B. Du Bois as well as Booker T. Washington, talking about the Atlanta Compromise and talking about Booker T's solution of wanting black people to prove themselves in the workforce to be able to receive their equality and also be able to be self-sufficient. And I think oftentimes one of the arguments that's made, one of the biggest supports for Booker T. Washington is because of the idea of, oh, well, what about accumulating black wealth and self-sufficiency? Do you feel that that was ever really a real possibility in America, given, and I guess we also have Tulsa and Rosewood and plenty of examples to say, smaller examples, but do you think that that was a possibility, or do you think that fact of segregation was still too detrimental to the success of those things for them to ever work?
And they get shut down
Yeah.
by white political power structures. But another component of that book that I'm working on, we don't talk about the most important black business that's black owned businesses that there ever were in the United States. Right? So if you were to pick up a history of black business, what they will tell you is that black insurance companies were the gold standard. No.
Really? It's not. That's definitely what, okay, you fooled me too, yeah, okay.
The number is lottery. Lottery. The lottery we know today, in 1937, the state didn't run it.
Okay.
It was run by private entrepreneurs.
Wow.
And the biggest sector were black entrepreneurs doing it.
Okay.
The problem, and they were making lots of money and supplying lots of jobs. And they were supplying jobs where you had to use skills. Obviously, there's a lottery. You got to have bookkeepers and accountants, and people got to figure out the odds and things like that, right? So,
wow. I remember in Malcolm X's autobiography, he was talking about being random numbers.
Right. That's a little problematic though, because I'll tell you why in a second.
Okay.
But federal government and state and local governments made it illegal. Lottery was illegal, but in lots of places horse racing wasn't. Bingo for money wasn't. Just the thing that the black folks were doing was made illegal. And the bankers who ran the lottery banks, they were the venture capitalists.
Wow.
Of the black community.
Yeah.
If you went to any city and you said, where are the biggest businesses? They would point you and they'd say, well, the lottery banker such and such started that business. Or his brother-in-law runs that business, but we know where the brother-in-law got the capital to start it up. That sort of thing. Right? And those were pure, for the most part, business people. They were doing illegal activities, but just like fugitive slave laws, they didn't view them as, they viewed them as unjust criminalizations. And the whole black community was behind them.
Wow.
But it got shut down as illegal, and then later on the state takes it over.
Yeah, on a massive level.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about Malcolm X is that later on, by the mid-60s and after, lottery does start to become more criminally minded.
Understood.
Right?
Yeah.
And the reason for it is, and the reason for that is that, one, civil rights movement brings in more highly credentialed black people, better educations or whatever, who used to work in lottery, can now get jobs where they're not under some kind of criminal threat of being arrested.
Yeah.
And maybe can even make more money.
Yeah.
Right? So you start to lose that group of people. And the only people who are willing to go in the lottery are the criminally minded.
Understood.
And if you read the passages in Malcolm X talking about that, it's the hustler criminal types.
Very true.
But before that period, top people who ran lottery banks were sons and daughters of black ministers, black professionals, lawyers.
Thank you for that distinction. Thank you. I understand that's very important because I was putting the two together.
Yeah.
Okay. Got you. Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow. The next question I have is about reparations. And I think reparations is a huge question.
Yes, it is.
And so I want to break it up because I in no way want to insinuate that financial reparations encompasses the majority of reparations that can and need to be incurred in this country.
Right.
But because we are on the vein of economics, I want to narrow the frame. From a purely financial standpoint, how do you conceptualize reparations as a way to account for generations of slavery, of predatory lending, of forced land dispossession, destruction of businesses,
right,
and even federally mandated housing discrimination?
Right. I think reparations is a difficult subject because it's easy to say we should get reparations, 250 years of slavery, and I accept all that, right? But my thought is that it's now too complex and expensive. You can go out and argue for it. There's too many people now.
Okay.
And it's not just, you got the problem of defining who's eligible for reparations.
Okay.
Right?
That's a problem. Yeah. I see that, yeah.
That's a problem. So it's going to be any descendant of any American slave, still a matter of now, once I come over and marry a descendant of an American slave, all 5 of my kids qualify for reparations. And that's been going on now for 100 years. Yeah. Right? So you got that problem. It's just too many people. And so how much money are you going to give them? So why would we want, so politically, we don't want to scream for reparations that's going to cost a couple $1 billion, but we're dividing it up by so many people that only get a few $1,000s. That's not worth it.
Respect, okay.
Right? So it's going to have to be a huge bill if we're just thinking in terms of financial reparations. See, I like to think of things not simply on their principled merit, but also what do we have to overcome politically to make this happen and make sense? Yeah. And these are the issues that I'm seeing.
I respect that, yeah.
Okay, so then I bring it back to thinking, let's think of other kinds of in-kind reparations. So that's just my take.
Yeah.
I just think as a political problem or issue, there's a lot to overcome. But I still think that people who are arguing for reparations are still doing us a great service.
I want to change the framing of this because I think you're looking at this from a national the U.S. government passing down a bill for reparations, right? There is a program going on in Fulton County right now in Atlanta, trying to create a framework of requesting or demanding reparations at the county level.
Okay, like the city of Evanston, Illinois, where Northwestern is.
Okay.
They passed a reparations thing for any black citizens who were residents at a certain time period.
Understood.
And
Okay.
I think it involves getting housing preferences and loans and
Interesting.
grants and things like that.
Okay.
Okay, so I can see that. Yeah.
Okay. Understood. And so, in your eyes, do you see bringing, because the national politics, I think there's debate of if we really live in a democracy, so I think the national politics of this country is going to be a hard question. Right. But, if we bring it down to this local, even potentially state level, county, municipal, state level, do you see this big issue of reparations as becoming more manageable?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because you can win. You can have some wins and some losses.
Yeah.
At the national, it's only you win or loss.
That's
it's
true.
Zero sum, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with that. That's a different way. And a lot of that's more, it's in kind stuff too, though, right? Yeah. We're a democracy, but we're a heavily biased democracy, and I blame colonial Massachusetts, New York, and Virginia.
Okay. Why is that?
Because when they set up the Constitution, they let these small states say we're going to have 2 senators in every state. We're going to have the electoral college come, later. What was Rhode Island going to do if they told them no?
Nothing.
They might have said, they might not have joined it right away, but sooner or later they're going to have to join.
Yeah. So
I think the big states, that's why I said Massachusetts, New York, and Virginia, that's the 3 biggest states at that time. You could throw Pennsylvania in maybe as the 4. They buckled under to those smaller states.
Yeah. I was reading a part of some research that I was doing, hopefully for a future project, but I was reading a letter between George Washington, and this is completely off track, but I was reading a letter between George Washington and a man, I think his name was Charles. Actually, what the letter was saying, and I think his name was Charles Chris or something like that. Okay. But essentially, the letter was saying, this was nearing the end of the Constitutional Convention. George Washington was reporting to him. He was like, and he said this in conference. It wasn't meant to be, but it ended up being, blown up. He was basically saying that the Constitution was not a perfect document. It had many issues, but if we don't move forward, we're at the risk of anarchy, right? And he said that, and I think many scholars believe that this created a panic that led to many states going ahead with it, right? And do you, I guess that it makes me think about, just the creation of this type of document, the Constitution, and the government that follows it, and how I feel like it was kind of made under the gun in many ways, which allowed for some,
something to be said for that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But we're stuck with that. That's the main thing that's blocking us off, right?
Yeah.
You think about the politics. That's why we have minority rule.
Yeah. I had a. Yeah. I think the question. So, as an economist, do you feel? And I think this is a 2-part question, because I guess you raised that question of if we're stuck with this Constitution, if we're stuck with this form of government, because as we know, it's a living document that can be amended, that can be changed, as well as we've seen the strife of this country between its inception to now. The first question I want to ask is, do you see the potential for Black people, and let's not even just limit this to Black people as African Americans, but as people who are not included into whiteness, right? Whiteness being privilege, or at least the construction of privilege under the laws and social expectations.
Yeah, I see where you're going with somewhat with that, and I agree with it for a long time, I don't like thinking in terms of black only.
Yeah.
And you got to live with reality.
Exactly.
Right?
Because this is not a black and white country or world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you gotta have coalition partners.
Exactly.
And you gotta grow up in one sense, right?
Exactly.
You say, oh, let's let the blacks have this. Well, you're
not
just
just like
shutting
that.
out all them other people that might be partners with you, but you just said we're not counting you.
Exactly. So, given that, do you feel that a level of financial equality, a level of bridge is possible, knowing the history of this country, knowing that it was built on such extreme inequality that you have people that are owning other people?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think we can overcome.
Okay.
I think we can overcome, but it's obviously a fight.
Yeah.
I mean, probably there's more racism than I even thought 10 years ago. And I knew there was lots of there was lots of people with racial, what's the word I want to use?
Animus, maybe.
Well, animus.
But maybe a different word, yeah.
Well, so it's a word that is often used by news pundits when they're talking about Trump voters.
Yeah.
The people who have complaints. You know, there's a lot of that. That race is an underlying component.
Yeah.
One of the underlying components, not everything. Right? I mean, many people can't handle change.
Yeah.
So it's not a surprise that the typical, MAGA are older people.
Yeah. Okay. So change is possible.
It's totally unimaginable for someone your age to think about that it's 1954 instead of, I don't really remember 1954 very well. I was around, but you turn on the TV, everything you see is white.
Yeah. And
I ain't talking about there's a scattering around. There's no scattering. Everything you see is white. Go to the movies, everything's white. Any place you go where anything good's happening, it's all white. And if there are any black people or any other kind of people of color, they're like somebody's doorman opening the door, or they're servants of some kind.
Yeah.
And to go to a Yale class now?
Yeah. Big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is not that big. The first Yale class I taught, 1977. Intermediate macroeconomics, about 40 students, 37 white. Out of the 37 white, 35 of those are men.
Yeah. Wow.
So I got one black student and maybe 2 Latinx. And I don't think there was any Asian students in that class. Cool thing though was that the best student in the class was that one black student who turned out to be Ida Barnett Wells' great-grandson.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Runs in the family, yeah. Wow. Wow. Okay. I think this is the. I'll have 2 more questions and I'll let you go because I really appreciate your completely insightful and I thank you. And I guess maybe a little more than 2, but it's basically basically
Your dad's not a minister, is he?
Oh man, or a performer on stage. Last song left. All right, my boy.
Right.
You were one of the founders of the Joint Economics and African American Studies PhD program here at Yale. what was your motivation for assembling this program?
Oh, okay.
Has it lived up to the goals that you had for it? And what do you think the present day mission of African American Studies as a whole should be?
All right. Well, your last question is something we're talking about over there, right? So, okay, what, and certainly for somebody like me who's really advancing in age, and I like to think about, what would this place look like 10 years from now? And 10 years from now, I certainly won't be here. But I'd like to play some role.
Yeah.
Not the major role, because I don't think, just like Joe Biden and Donald Trump really oughtn't be the people running the country, because they're too damn old, both of them.
Understood.
I don't think I should be the main force or one of the main forces, but I got some wisdom to share with them.
Yeah.
The people who would be making those decisions. But we had started a master's degree program in '78. And what happened was, people started coming, they would get their master's degree. And when we discovered, I was chair of AFAM. This is 1990. And I ordered up a report to show what was happening to the students who came into our master's program. Where were they 4 years later or whatever? Well, it turned out 3/4 of them had a PhD or were in a PhD program. And out of those 3/4, 2/3 of them were still at Yale, but they over in some department where they had a PhD.
Interesting.
So I said, damn, we're already a PhD program.
Yeah.
It's just that we don't technically grant a PhD.
Yeah.
That was the impetus. Since we are. And then the second thing that happened was, because we were a master's program, our students were getting second-class treatment.
Understood.
It wasn't because they're black, but it's because they're a master's program and not a doctorate program, right? So they were getting smaller stipends and a few other things, right? So I'll never forget, I wrote the provost and I said this was unacceptable and that the faculty had voted that we were going to close down the master's program unless we got equal treatment with all the other graduate students in the FAS. And that's how we got that.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, master's kids were getting the same stipends as the PhDs and all that. So the next step was, let's be a PhD program. And I remember I was talking to the dean of the graduate school, who was a professor of religious studies, Jerome Pollitt. And at the end of the conversation we had, he said, why don't you guys just get a PhD program? So at Yale, unlike some other places, we never had any pushback against it.
Understood.
Right? And so we wrote up a proposal. We said, we're already a PhD program, so just make us one. The difficulty was figuring out how to make the thing work.
Yeah.
And that's how we came up with the joint degree. Because we thought of it, we're supposed to be interdisciplinary. But see, for me, and fortunately, most of the faculty agreed, you can't really be interdisciplinary unless you're grounded in a discipline, at least one discipline first, and then go to a second one or a third, right? Because you gotta have some kind of disciplinary training and thinking. And our faculty was already built that way, because everybody was joint with somebody, and so that's how it came in.
Okay.
And we never hit any bumps.
Do you feel
that when we sent, so by the time we sent the proposal for, well, first off, I guess this is where I learned this from Harold Washington, the Cecil Partee, how to do politics.
In Chicago, okay, yeah.
When we were doing the proposal, we in a faculty meeting one day, and I looked around and I said, if we're gonna have this thing joint,
Mm-hmm.
we need departments to sign on with us. So what we're gonna do is we're not gonna send out a proposal and then see if anybody wants to join. We're gonna get people to join. It's gonna be in the proposal
Understood.
that the English department and the French department and the history department and sociology already is on board with this thing. And then and why is it easy? So we didn't realize how powerful we were. We already got somebody who's in the English department. We got 3 people in the English department. We got people in the history department. We got people in the sociology department. You guys go back to your departments and sell this.
Yeah. Wow.
And so when we finally got to it, we had 10 departments already all lined up.
Immediately. Wow.
To go. And then we sent it over to the graduate school, and at that time Rick Levin was dean of the graduate school, and to talk about who, of course, because he was from economics, so I've been knowing him a long time. He and I coached the Little League together because our sons are the same age. And not only did he not give us pushback, he sent it back with some notes. They could be better if you would change this to that, and almost all of his suggestions were constructive.
Yeah.
Well, all of them were constructive, and we took 90% of them.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And I know that's not what happened at some other places when they were setting up a graduate program.
Understood.
They had pushback.
Yeah. Had to try to validate why they even need
Yeah, exactly. And we never had to do that.
Good. Okay. Okay. Do you feel that the program has lived up to your goals for it?
Yeah, our people are everywhere.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, I went to a conference, it's been 20 years ago now. I went to a conference, it was like a Black Studies conference, and everybody, at every event you went to was like Yale PhDs were involved in it, or somebody was talking about some work that they had done, or things like that, and I said, yeah, this is the fruit of what we have done. So I'm maybe the proudest thing I can say is the role that I played in putting that together.
Understood.
And then, and it's become, and it's still intact. The original structure we put together, I mean, there have been some fluff changes, but the original structure is the same as it was in 1993 when the first class came in. And with a lot of improvements that you get from experience, right?
Wow. Man, that's amazing. I've seen just being being able to collaborate students while I was an undergrad, being taught people who were in the PhD program, doing different things, was really great opportunity for me. Just because these are people who are smart, they know what they're talking about, they're passionate about what they do.
Right.
And so and the professors are amazing as well. So completely agree.
Yeah. Yeah, but now we're thinking, okay, my idea. First off, now this is personal. I know there's other people that agree with it too, but I don't like the name African American Studies.
Why not?
Okay, well, because me and you, we're black Americans.
Yes.
Right. Your family come from the Caribbean any time recently?
Not recently.
Okay, so you've been in the States along several generations. See, so I guarantee you don't just have African ancestry.
Fair.
That's my point. And people will say, well, look, just because they look at somebody, so you got darker skin, they think, no, that doesn't mean anything, right? Look at me and they know, okay, I can't be 100% African, right, ancestry. We're black Americans.
Yeah.
And here's the issue. It's not running from Africa, because I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a denial of what you really are.
I see that.
Our family tree's got Africans, Europeans, and Native Americans.
Yeah.
And like I tell my class, that means it puts my roots to Africa, Europe, and Asia.
Yeah.
Right? And why are we hiding that thing?
That's true.
So to call us African Americans is not to be comprehensive and not to think about who we really are. That's why I prefer black.
I can respect that. That's a perspective I have not heard on that on that specific term before ever, and I appreciate that.
And you can have people out there, screaming, because there are people that call themselves Africans. They've been in the States. Their family been here since 1750, but they're calling themselves Africans. No way they can be 100% African.
Fair. Okay.
Not after all this time, because that's kind of what an American is.
Yeah.
Even the white people, they've been here a long time. They got something else in them.
Yeah. Understood. Yeah. I see where you come from. Okay. Yeah. And I can see how that factors into the name and the framing of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so my thought is more thinking in terms of global Black studies.
Okay.
Not just not just North America or the United States,
but global Black studies.
Global Black studies, and even bringing in Africa, because I'm more interested. I think we need to. One of the areas I think we need to be pushing into is the study of antiquity and the Black African presence in Egyptian civilization. That sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think those are all amazing ideas, and I hope to see them take place, really, because I think they make sense. Okay. I think the last question I have for you, this is actually the last one this time.
Okay.
What would you encourage people, or how would you encourage people to respond in the face of threats to repeal the same civil rights that you saw established, such as, affirmative action, such as, voting rights?
All right, voting rights and affirmative action is two really different things.
That's fair.
Right?
That's fair.
All right, voting rights, that's sort of like, remember when I said when I got off that plane in San Francisco, kissed the ground, glad to be back in the US of A, and thought about my future and who I was as an American, right?
Yeah.
And they don't owe me anything other than what I should get as a citizen of equality.
Yes.
Well, voting rights would be one of those things, right?
Yes, exactly.
Affirmative action would be more one of those special things.
Yeah, reparative action.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you the truth. In the last decade or two, I've begun to think that affirmative action we paid a greater political price for its existence than the payoff that we were getting.
Okay.
Because without it, I don't think our numbers will fall that much.
But I think I want to consider this though. So, introduced at a time when there was little to no Black people at white schools.
Yeah, because see, that's what people don't know what affirmative action meant.
Okay, explain.
Remember, one of the few benefits of getting old is that you know things like that.
Yes, okay.
So when I was an undergraduate, affirmative action, you know what it meant?
What?
All affirmative action meant was, and believe me, I know what I'm talking about. I was in the student union. We had these arguments all the time. And it meant that an organization or institution had to take affirmative action, which meant you got to go an extra step. You got to spend more resources to find qualified Black people.
Okay, understood.
That morphed into show us the numbers. So it wouldn't be good enough if a firm came and said, we spent a lot of time, we went to places where we didn't used to go looking for students, say, school, looking for students, but we only found 2.
Wow.
And somebody that's not enough, so now you got to do some numbers. Well, the 10% of the population, get us 10%. Well, if we go back to thinking, right, given what we know about the quality of high schools where many Blacks are going to school, and the credentials they're coming out with, if Blacks are, 15% of 18-year-olds, that's probably a pretty close number.
Okay.
Do you really think 15% of them ought to be at Princeton? The percentage of Blacks at Princeton should be 15%? I'm going to keep us out of this. See, You gotta face reality. That's a hard question for you. I knew it would.
That's a big question.
Yes.
I think this first and foremost though. Do we? And I don't want to disrespect this institution because I understand the caliber it holds itself to and that the professors hold it to. But do we completely buy into the idea that a Princeton education is so much different than a Florida State education? Than a Florida
But that's
A&M
a whole
education?
different question.
But I asked that to say, because you said, should 15% of black students be at Princeton? And I think what that question predicates on is Princeton so much different than another school that it should not be representative of the population?
Well, I guess that's kind of missing part of the question that I was saying. Maybe I don't know what the percentage is of Florida State.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But you raise a good question.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Raise a good question. But then that's back, now we're talking about really changing the whole culture of an institution.
Which I think
and
is
how people are thinking. And I agree on one line, like I really disagree with Yale bringing back the SAT.
Okay.
They just brought back, they just announced it last week.
After COVID, they lifted it on and then they brought it back.
Now they brought it back. I think that's going to cause some issues.
Okay.
For them, too, for Yale, the institution. Because I don't like the SAT. And I think that there are better ways to pick your students.
Understood.
If the SAT was simply used to say, if you can't score some certain number, we know you can't make it through our classes. That would be a whole different story.
Yeah.
But the way the average person out there on the street looks at it is, if you score 2 points higher than me, you're more qualified.
Understood.
And we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
Or even if you score 20 points more than me. Right?
Yeah. Understood.
Yeah, see, so, and that's back to what I said was the original definition of affirmative action.
Yeah.
See, SAT makes it easy, right? We can pick students by, if your score is not above this bottom line, we don't even have to read any of those people. We don't pay much attention to those people.
Yeah.
But if you're not using SAT now, all of a sudden, you got to be really paying attention to what's in that application.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
But if you think about it on a logical ground, we got whole school systems, Baltimore.
Yeah.
Where many of the schools, nobody is reading at grade level.
Yeah.
How are we going to make an argument that those schools at this moment in time should be represented at the University of Maryland at some proportional level? We can't. That was my point about the 15%.
I respect that.
That's my point.
I respect that.
What we need to be doing is pursuing affirmative action in the way that we had to change the name now because it's too overladen, right, with value judgments. But pursuing it in that way and then also working to get to that latter point where all of a sudden Baltimore schools are producing much stronger students on average.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of how to respond in the face of the repeal of these, understanding how to reframe the actions being taken and being able to address the underlying problems beneath them first.
Right. You got to stop thinking in terms of you got to figure out what is the best way forward, and how do we convince others
Understood.
to join us.
Okay. Do you think there's anything that I left out or anything that's on your mind?
You thought your questions through. So you said the questions.
Well, thank you. Well, Professor Jaynes, I appreciate you so much for having this conversation with me and sharing your wisdom and your own experience. I really appreciate it.
All right, great.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good to talk.